We wanted the building to perform, but we also wanted a house that actually just had a sense of calmness. There is a sense of sanctuary and privacy that's a combination of both architectural and landscaping sort of combining together, and that is really important. I think we, as architects, will talk to the structure and the built form, but the way that the garden, the courtyard and the grounds stitch with the architectural strategy was very important to us. I am Tim Hay.
I'm Jeff Fearon.
This is the Rose Bay House.
We're at one end of Rose Bay, so we look across the body of water back towards the city. It's steep terrain away from the level of the harbour, and it is a site that slopes up, closely sort of crowded by neighbours as the hill rises up from the harbour. The advantage of coming from an elevated position is that the house itself can be quite discreet, and certainly the existing house that was here, you really didn't read it from the street, given the grounds were very heavily vegetated, and I think that's something we really want to keep, or enhance in fact. So that sense of coming off the street and gently dropping into the garden was working up something that we'd experienced when we first came to the site and figuring out how we'd change that. The biggest difference probably is the architecture was designed not to have this kind of heavy masonry structure that rises up from the contour, but more to be these kind of floating shells that sit over the gardens and that you slip under those or through those to arrive at the terrace that is the delivery towards the view. It was always going to be a family home. That meant a number of things across the years that were in front of us. So it needed to be a home that could flexibly accommodate different ages and stages as the family grows and rejoins and then goes off on different ventures. I think entertaining has always been, or gathering has been a big part of the client's life, and is something that they're very passionate about. So it was always configured in such a way that it could host different groups of people within the family, but also much more diverse groups of people who might come and visit and enjoy the finished property as well.
The other challenge with that brief was that we wanted the house to have a sense of scale that was also intimate when there were just the two people in the house, and obviously the children are accommodated, but that they're at an age where they're sort of transitioning from being children to sort of young adults and moving away from the building. So as we were configuring the house, it needed to sort of be able to have the occupation of a large group, but still that sense of intimacy if, you know, there was just a couple of people having breakfast together. So the process of understanding the extent of those variations of occupation were quite critical in the planning. We wanted to have spaces that were defined. We didn't want to have a plan that was completely open in all directions. So there was a division of the spaces that needed to occur. There was a sense that we didn't want to contain them with doorways and as cells, but we didn't also want a plan that was open and undefined as completely sort of free space. So as we developed the planning, we wanted that definition to be through material detail, through containment of glazed and contained elements. So the division was purposeful. We were looking at which spaces needed to address which opportunity. Obviously the harbour was a very strong aspect, and there's an extent of outlook and breadth that addresses that. But in balance, we also wanted the opportunity of light and light penetration through the day to be available to the plan. And I think the process where we considered a day in the life, what was the occupation through the day, and a morning sunbeam in the kitchen was something that was absolutely critical to us. So the planning both addressed outlook, opportunities for sun, and opportunities to balance the view to the harbour with the garden, as we mentioned before, was a dual, an experience that wanted to be available in a number of spaces. So rather than having a sense of outlook that was singular, there was a sense of visual stereo or surround sound from a visual point of view that we were trying to sort of incorporate into the spaces. The house at its essence has this conflict between being both solid and light, and that was something that we loved about the evolution of the design. We wanted a house, the client was very clear, that had to be robust, had to be solidly built. It was embedded into the ground. And one of the things that we thought about early on in the design process was if we could have a sense of the skin having the robustness that we need, but had this delicacy to it, that would be beautiful. And we started to look at samples, and stone was one that we wondered, how could we have something that had the permanence of stone, but provide the lightness? And then early on in the design process, we came to site with a number of samples, and we held them up and we looked at them on the site. And there was this moment when the light that was dappled through the trees came through one of the samples of stone that we had in our hand. And it was a moment where we said, well, this starts to fulfill those ambitions. It provides the layering, it has a sense of delicacy, and also a sense of movement. So that process of setting those ambitions from a design point of view, testing the materials, and then physically coming here and starting to hold things in the air, it was fascinating. It meant that, you know, we discovered with the client an opportunity through that process. The robustness is the fact that the building is embedded in the ground. We have a basement level that we had to cut sandstone geology away to sort of embed the building. So as it rises from that base, there are 3 levels, and it has different personalities as it rises up. As it rises from the basement, it is definitely contained. There is no outlook. As it traverses the mid-level, which we're on, that solidity dissolves. And there is obviously a sense of outlook and view and aspect that we're trying to capture. And as it transitions to the 3rd level, the sort of sleeping level of the building, it is a balance of those 2 things actually. It becomes solid again, but it becomes solid with a very different material. It has a skin and shell of stone that provides protection. As we climb, we are also more visible to the neighbours in the surrounding neighbourhood, but we also wanted to be living in a home that had a sense of lightness and able to capture the opportunity of morning and afternoon sun.
One of the things that we kind of think is defining about designing spaces as residential spaces or to live in is that it's a beautiful opportunity to have spaces that have exterior light or openness on both sides, or at least 2 sides. If you are in a space that is kind of 2 or 3 layers deep into the occupancy of the home, it's a long way from being able to feel that you're connected to the exterior, and I think that almost defines what it feels like to be in one of our homes, is that you can connect to the external environment from each of the spaces quite directly.
We love returning to a building that we've designed after a period of time because things change. I think the garden has matured incredibly, and it's taken on the sense of balance we imagined initially when we designed the building, but knew had to have a period of time to establish, and that balance is one of the things that we love.